Hey everyone, this is Alan Schimmel, DevOps.com, DevOps TV. We're here in London for the DevOps Enterprise Summit 2018. And our guest for this segment is GitLab CEO, Sid Sijbrandij.
Yep, thanks for
having me. Okay?
Yeah, you did that perfectly.
All right, Sid, it's a pleasure to meet you in person. We've spoken, I think, on a podcast, but that's kind of virtual. And here we are in London. We had to come a little bit of a long way to get together, but it was worth it. Let me first start off with this day 2 of the DevOps Enterprise Summit. You've been to your share of DevOps events prior. What impressions of DevOps Enterprise Summit?
Yeah, I like it. I like it a lot. It was great. The speaker dinner earlier was a great experience, but also like the people here really care about DevOps. Yeah. Kind of figures, but it's still it's
a little bit obvious.
Obvious, but even if you look at the other booths, like it's all the people we meet in the market. If you look at the attendees, it's all the people that really care about this and that are at the forefront. So it was great starting off. Like the first 2 presentations was Jin Kim introducing, and then the first presentation was from Jaguar Land Rover about how they use GitLab. It was just awesome.
Was it? Yeah, well. So I know Chris from Jaguar. We actually interviewed him yesterday, and I've done some stuff with Chris in the past. What a phenomenal story that is, man.
He's
transformative.
He's transformative. He has a lot of work to do. It's not an organization that is supporting him. He's making it happen, and I'm really, really proud of his work.
Yeah, no, I mean it's phenomenal. So Sid, you mentioned GitLab, and I think at this point, most of our listeners out here are familiar with GitLab, and so we don't need to start at square one. But recently we've seen, was it GitLab 11?
Yep.
Is the latest release?
Yeah, Friday a week ago.
Yep. So any highlights you want to share, and what's the big news in GitLab 11?
The big news is auto DevOps. So it's gone generally available, and the idea is, with GitLab, you add a cluster to a project or a group, then you push your code, and then GitLab figures out the rest. So it figures out how to build it, how to run your tests, how to check the quality, how to check the performance, like in the browser, how to whether it's secure code. So it runs 4 different types of security tests. There's a review app. It can deploy to production. It does all these things automatically, including like hooking up your metrics, your monitoring. And that's what we want to do. We want to make it easier for people to adopt good modern DevOps practices, Kubernetes if they want to, and make that not something you have to invest hours in to set everything up. People here said, like, if you want to do something, in my organization, I now have to send 7 tickets. That's no longer needed. You just push your code, GitLab figures out the rest and sets everything up. And we're really excited by offering that.
The audacity of automating DevOps, right? Which in and of itself is supposed to automate the tasks that we do. We're now automating the automation.
Exactly.
And it's quite a concept to wrap your head around, isn't it? What's the reception in the market been?
I think people are wrapping their heads around it, but now that it's on by default, we see a lot more people using it. I think people are still adopting Kubernetes, so they're still finding out where we're going to run our clusters, whether it's on-prem, which cloud, etc. But the people that are using it are really liking it, and they want more. They say, okay, it's great, I have metrics, but I also want my logs in it. I also want my tracing in it. So we're working on all these things.
Things coming down the road.
Yep.
They always want more, don't they?
Luckily.
It's good and good for all of us.
Amazon
right?
calls them divinely discontent.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
that's how we like to think about them.
Yep.
The nice thing with GitLab is sometimes they contribute code as well.
Well, I was just going to bring that up as our next subject, right? So, I mean, excuse me, certainly open source software is not news in the DevOps world, right? In many ways, DevOps was built on open source software. But GitLab has sort of a little bit of a different twist in it, in that the community is still contributing so much of the code, of the features, of the heavy lifting that we see in new versions of GitLab and so forth. And contrast that with other, and I'm not pointing fingers or saying one's necessarily good or bad, but other open source projects where, yes, they're open source, but 98.9 or 99.8% of the code is done by the core team of the managing corp or something like that. What do you attribute the difference at GitLab?
Yeah, we're really proud. Like every release, we have about 100 things that come from the wider community, 100 contributions, and we attribute that to a couple of things. The transparency. We started the company trying to be as transparent as possible. So it's not that you cannot see what's coming down the pipe from the people at GitLab. You can watch us on the issue tracker. So you're never duplicating something that someone else is working on. Your work's never going to be wasted. We got merge request coaches who help people meet the definition of done. And if necessary, we'll even add to your work just to help you get over the finish line. So we're really passionate about those contributions making it in. And I think those things really help to galvanize the community and not have this effect where it's an open source license, but in reality it's a closed source project.
Right. And that's important. I mean, especially, again, I think our audience is familiar with GitLab. They may not be intimately familiar with GitLab, but the GitLab vision for things like automated DevOps and almost like a soup to nuts approach to DevOps versus just trying to specialize in a CD pipeline or something.
We started off as just source control, but we've transformed into this single application for the complete DevOps pipeline. So all the way from portfolio management, issue tracking, source control, but also CI, CD, configuration management, monitoring. There's even a container registry right in GitLab. And I think there's a lot of open source projects that kind of do one thing well. But if you just are a point solution, you tended to get eclipsed by proprietary software. Like Bugzilla, it got eclipsed by Jira. Lots of those point solutions don't quite make it. The value is in integrating, and that's where companies are prepared to pay for. So
now, of course, Atlassian would say Jira is open source. Yeah.
Is it?
I think it might be. There's probably an open source community version and a
I think they have a license where open source projects could use it for free. So, for example, the Apache Foundation still runs Jira.
Okay.
But I don't think you can contribute to it. Now they have.
No, you can't contribute to it.
They have a very extensive.
Well, that's exactly what I was talking about early on. They may say they're open source, but the fact of the matter is they're owned lock, stock, barrel from a code contribution.
I think there's a bit of confusion in the market about being open source and being used by open source. And I think Jira and GitHub are good examples of products that are used a lot by open source projects, but that themselves are not open source.
So this is something I spent a lot of time on for the last 20 years. I think you got to look at the licenses they're issued under, obviously. There was a period of time where open source purists said that open source software had to be under the GPL version 2, 1, 3, whatever the latest versions was. And then the Apache license was obviously another well-recognized open source license. And then it started getting a little hairy. Right, and I come from the security world, Sid, and we saw this with Nessus. I don't know how much you know about Nessus,
yeah, for
right?
sure.
All of a sudden, Ron and Renee and Renaud, I think it was after version 2.4 or 2.7, decided it wasn't going to be open source anymore, right? So if you still want to run an open source version of Nessus,
you have to go back to the old one.
Yeah, I think it's 2005 maybe or 6, something maybe in that range.
I think that got forked to OpenVAS, I think.
Happened right around then. I actually helped with that.
Oh, wow.
I'm that old. I was there when all that. Now, my other friend, and I'm actually good friends with Ron Guler. Over the years we've known each other well. And then Marty Roche, who did Snort, right, took a different path. He always kept Snort open. It was just the rules that became, the syntax stuff that became proprietary, right? The SourceFire rule set.
Yep.
So, there's a lot of ways to skin the OpenCat business game, right? MuleSoft just got bought by Salesforce, right?
Yep.
For a lot of money. They had this open source business model. Of course, there's Red Hat and so many others. And that brings us good, it's a good way of coming to this. How does GitLab cross that chasm from open source, a great open source tool, tremendous community, thousands, tens, hundreds of thousands of users, commercial entity?
Yep.
Where is the value, right, for the business owner to go commercial?
Yep. Yeah, so when GitLab very quickly had a lot of usage, more than 100,000 organizations, millions of users. And when we introduced a proprietary version of GitLab, the community asked, is there an alternative? And we tried to explain, we tried everything. We tried consulting, we tried paid support, we tried donations. Nothing works.
None of that's going to work.
To have a sustainable model. Then we said, okay, we're going to add features on top. So we'll never take an open source feature away. We're going to add features on top. And all the core parts of GitLab, like the whole DevOps lifecycle, you can do with the open source version. There's companies running the open source version with over 20,000 users. There's no artificial restrictions in there.
CPU usage or server instances or anything like that.
Nothing like that. It is really about us adding value on top. And in the beginning, the community was very worried. And one person said, and that's a very interesting model, why can't we make it like WordPress plugins that are sold, but they still have an open source license? So we tried that out. We did that for 6 months. And we learned two things. First of all, the community got comfortable with our value proposition. They saw the open source project was now improving faster than before. The other thing was great confusion with our customers who say, I got to pay for this, but it's open source. I don't get it.
Makes no sense to me.
And sometimes they couldn't even pay for it. So we stopped that. We started making the new features proprietary. But we managed to hold on to that community that saw that we were doing the right thing. And sometimes we kind of make a mistake. We make something proprietary that makes more sense for the overall ecosystem to be open source. And when we do that, we reverse it.
Absolutely.
GitLab pages, multiple features we did for GNOME. For Debian, they protested. They said, hey, we don't like that we have to assign copyright to the company. So we moved away from that to a certificate of origin where people keep their copyright. So we're just trying to make pragmatic decisions all along the way.
So I've lived the life, right? And so what you're describing in some ways was the open core model, which again, people like Richard Stallman and some of the purists in the open source space had a problem with that open core model. And then the same issue with contributed code and copyright issue, right? So it's unrealistic, and this is just us talking, we happen to be being filmed, but let's talk about it. It's unrealistic for you as the CEO of a company to be able to sell software to other organizations that are going to rely on it, and they have to worry about some developer sitting in Belgrade somewhere who says, oh, wait a second, that was my code you're using in there, and I've just decided I want to get compensated for it, or I want to pull it out of the thing.
That can't happen.
You can't do that.
No.
You can't build a business like this. So you needed a mechanism, a workaround where I'm not looking to steal the code you built that you contributed. I want you to have credit, right? I want you to be acknowledged.
And I think even that can be achieved by open source projects. I think the reason why you want a project at a certain point to have a business around it is because someone should be responsible for like the performance fixes, for the security fixes, for the bounty program, for the upgrades. And in the beginning of a project, everyone's super enthusiastic and people kind of dove into our issue tracker to kind of fix things. But as a project grows bigger, there's more and more like later adopters. Right. And the early adopters, they're just so inundated with things that you kind of need this housekeeping. Otherwise, you see some open source projects almost like collapsing under their own weight.
Because everyone just wants to be a beta tester at that point, right?
People are very enthusiastic about contributing features. People are not very enthusiastic about some upgrades. Having said that, some people actually help us out with Bootstrap 3.4, with Rails 4.5. Shout out to like Blackstone, who helps us with that. But the giant part of the effort, it is a lot of work, and the expectations are just higher. If you look at the reactions to GitLab 11, people have very high expectations of what we should ship, right, and that it all should work and that nothing should break. And I think that's right, but you need people on the payroll to do that.
Absolutely. And there's another element to it in my mindset, and that is, look, if you are going to sell to an enterprise, and it could be the largest enterprises in the world, it could be startups, organizations, but if you're going to sell to commercial entities, they want to know there's someone behind there.
Yeah,
right.
It's their job on the line making that decision.
Absolutely.
So they want to make sure there's a professional services team that helps them.
Right, but it's even more than services. That someone's looked at the code and said, okay, we're not using an old version of an open source component. We've tested this. We've tested it. It works. That there's a butt to kick if something goes wrong. And so, because you can't make that transition without that. You cannot become a commercial entity.
And that it's secure, and like we pay people to look at the code and catch our mistakes and make sure it's as secure as it can be.
I'm glad you brought it up. That's another lesson we've learned over the years is, when I first got involved in the open source software movement back in 2000, 2001, the prevailing thought was open source is more secure because there's more eyes on the code. And, over the years we have found, the OpenVPN is the great example of this, right? Everybody used OpenVPN. It's the standard.
Yep.
Well, no one was really looking. No one bothered to look at some really basic security things.
I think with open core you can combine the best, because I do think that Sunlight is a disinfectant, and just knowing that your code is going to be public just helps, and you have people looking at it, but it also really helps to run a good bounty program.
Have it right, and have all of the things that frankly commercial code software does.
Exactly. You combine the best of both worlds.
There should be no reason, exactly. Sid, we're almost out of time, but there's maybe a little redundant, but I wanted to touch on all of these things that we're talking about allow you to be able to sell GitLab to commercial enterprises. When most open source software finds its way into the enterprise via the back door, right? A lower level technology guy brings it in because it does the job. He has a problem. He has an itch he wants to scratch.
Exactly.
Right? But then at some point, someone's got to sign off, especially if we're going to use it enterprise-wide. Someone's got to sign off. And that oftentimes is where the open source or even the open core company kind of, the moat before it crosses into the castle. What's the value prop? How do you close that with GitLab?
Yeah, so you're exactly right. Like it comes in, individual developers and teams, and they use the version control or they use the CI. But what we do is we come in, we have a conversation at the top of the company, C-level, VP level, and we don't talk about features. We talk about making the DevOps lifecycle faster. Because if you can go faster from making a decision, we're going to do this, to having it customer facing, everything gets better. Like you have a faster time to value, you have smaller chunks of projects that require less coordination, you have fewer cancellations, everyone has a sense of progress. So the whole company gets better. And we see on average that GitLab can do that like 3 times, make it 3 times faster. But that requires to convince those people, like, hey, this is a best of breed. Like, these are the best products in the industry that you're going to use. If you use them together, you can go a lot faster. You're now stuck in a local optima where you have a great tool for this, a great tool for this, a great tool for that, but you're responsible for integrating them. You have 10 to 50 people working on integrating those tools. Guess what? That should be a shared effort. You shouldn't do that by yourself. You should do that with 100,000 organizations together, with 10,000 people commenting, with 2,000 people contributing code to that, so that that's undifferentiated.
Greater
it's not
than
unique.
the sum of its parts.
Yeah, it's not unique to your business. So share that effort, and GitLab encodes all the DevOps best practices. So if you adopt that, you get that for free, and that's what we come in with, and that takes some talking, and that also takes a top-down motion, because people like their tools, and they've been using Jira for some time, and they don't call themselves a build engineer anymore. They call themselves a Jira or Jenkins engineer sometimes.
Yeah.
So, like, it's not always easy to replace that. So you need to show business value, and that's how we do it.
Absolutely. Sid, we've definitely gone over time. I can't help it. But it was a fascinating conversation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Always a
Thank
pleasure.
you for supporting DevOps Enterprise Summit. And it's a pleasure to have you here. Well, we've done podcasts. Maybe we'll do more. It's great stuff to talk about.
Looking forward to it.
Okay. Sid Sijbrandij, CEO, GitLab, here in London for DevOps Enterprise Summit, UK 2018. This is Alan Schimmel for DevOps.com and DevOps TV. Have a great day.